Ben is on that committee with marijuana, and I am not, and I'm glad that I'm not. Most everything I know from what goes on there, I've heard from either Ben or Representative Josh West, or my friend Senator Greg McCourtney, who also serves on that committee. And I think from what I've been hearing, they're all doing a great job, and I'm looking forward to seeing the legislation that we're going to be moving forward in this next session. Basically, got a couple of things wrong. I have to make sure, and I didn't catch it on the bio when he showed it to me. I no longer have 11 grandchildren. We have 13.
Wow,
and
congratulations.
So that's very important. My youngest was born during my first session on a Thursday, and I had to. We just finished voting. I got a call, said, "Hey, your daughter-in-law is in labor. Get here to Claremore." So I did, and when I got there, she had the baby. It was my son's fourth son, and every time he had one, he wanted to have a girl. He had a little girl who died a few days after she was born, his first child, and they wanted to have another girl, but they kept having boys, and they wouldn't name them after me. And so I kept telling him, "Look, you're a junior. We need to continue this. If you want to have a girl, I've got a curse on you. And until you name one after me, you're going to continue having boys." So I walked into the hospital room, and my daughter-in-law's laying there in the bed, and my son's sitting over there by the window. And as I walked in, she goes, "Hey, your dad's here. Do you want to tell him?" He goes, "Yeah, sure, why not?" She goes, "Okay, we've decided we're naming this one after you." So now I have Micheal Bergstrom the third as a grandson. So now they can move on and have girls. I have removed the curse. I am happy to answer any questions on any subject that you have. As he said, I'm on business, commerce, and tourism. That is my primary focus is economic development. But I'm also on education because education, of course, that's where I came out of. I actually spent almost 19 years. I spent 18 years, going on 19 years at Blue Jacket as the high school English department there. Small school. I taught everybody basically. So, education, if we're going to have economic development, we have to have an educated workforce. And so education, of course, is extremely important. That's one reason why I fought for the teacher pay raise that we got this past year. So instead of me going on and talking a whole lot, how about if anybody has a question on any subject, I will try to answer to the best of my ability, although medical marijuana is one area that I have very little expertise in. So, any questions? This could be short.
Well, it could be. I gotta think somebody's going to ask about the budget.
The teachers got their raises, just kicking the can down the road.
No, thanks for the question. Yes, the teachers did get the raise, and it is fully funded. It began in July. Yeah, it began in July, and there has been some talk about how it was only funded for 1 year, and that's not correct. The way that they did it, which I think personally was foolish and I argued against, they had funds going in to one way the first year, and then the funds were coming a different way the second year and on. They should have done it the same way all the way across, but it's fully funded, it's in place, and that teacher pay raise that ranges from a little over $5,000 for a beginning teacher to about $8,300 for, I think, a 20 or 25-year teacher. $6,100 average teacher pay raise. It's in place, and so and I've had teachers who have contacted me and thanked me for that teacher pay raise. So, go ahead.
Across the world, it had all the states around on we were considerably below. The chances of getting a raise over a period of time, I don't believe that's more competitive. We're losing a lot of great people.
I think that there's, as far as it goes, I know that probably this session we're not going to see any more as far as a teacher pay raise. I think that when you look at the teacher pay raise and you take the cost of living into consideration for the state of Oklahoma, we actually now, we've moved it up from the bottom ranking to actually 12th in the nation in pay and benefits for Oklahoma teachers. So, and one reason, you know, obviously as a teacher, I was in education, and I thought that it was important for us to get a teacher pay raise. But that, when I would deal with economic development folks, when I would talk to businesses, when I talked to the chambers of commerce and that, or the Department of Commerce, and I would ask about why this business that we were trying to get come to the state didn't come to the state. Over and over again, I would hear the response that their concern was with education in Oklahoma. They were concerned about having an educated workforce. And then one of the top considerations that they would put forth when they were talking about education being an issue was the teacher pay, because we're ranked so low in teacher pay. That's another one of the reasons why I fought as hard as I did for the teacher pay raise, because I wanted us to send a message to the businesses across this nation and across the world for that matter, because we do have businesses coming in from Italy and Germany and that. We want to let them know we're serious about education and we're serious about, you know, taking care of it. 12th in the nation when you take cost of living into consideration, but we want to make sure that we maintain that and keep improving our education system. And we're going to be working on other things in education this year, but I don't think we'll see another teacher pay raise this year. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you. Good question. Yeah.
I'm sure everybody here is aware of these lotteries that have just gone outside. It's like there's one with $1.6 billion. And you know, we voted to have these lotteries come into Oklahoma, and it was supposed to solve all the education problems that we have. What kind of percentage do they get from that? I mean, are they getting any benefit from what the lottery?
Yeah. Well, that's a good question. When the lottery was first proposed, back when Brad Henry was pushing that years ago, he was making the promise that it would bring $600 million a year to education. And then after he got in and he was pushing, he said, well, it's going to be $300 million a year to education. The reality is it's never really topped more than about $75 million a year. And that amount has gone up a little bit because they did tweak the lottery system about a year or so ago. And as far as awards and different things like that. And so we've seen a slight increase in the amount because it was in the 60 million range. It's now up to 70-something million. The last time I looked at it, as I recall. It all goes to education. It goes directly to education. But it's nowhere near what was promised, you know, when it was being sold. So, you know, it is going toward education. It's directed there. But I think sometimes what we've seen, just like anything, when money is directed to something like that, sometimes, and I think this happened, you know, over the years, not recently, but over the years. I can tell you, I know it hasn't happened in the last couple years, but you've seen funds being moved away from general fund money that might have gone and has been directed elsewhere instead of being added to it. I think that's been part of the problem.
Yeah, well, wonderful. Where does it go?
No, the money from the lottery does go directly to education. And there's actually several sources of revenue that go directly to education. Any other questions?
Mm-hmm.
How much of that lottery money goes to higher education?
That's a good question, and I honestly don't remember how it's broken down.
So, if I understood it correctly, it's not just for our K-12 schools, it's also college and universities as well.
I'll be honest with you, I don't remember what the breakdown is, if there is a breakdown like that. Anything else?
No.
Okay, you have a question?
State question 794 will be on the ballot November 6th.
Uh-huh.
It's also known as Marcy's Law.
Yes.
Are you in support of that?
Yes. Yeah, Marcy's Law. Basically, I mean, as I've looked at it and discussed it with others, the Marcy's Law question, basically it's giving the same rights to the victims that the offenders have, you know, and protects them, allows them to be able to follow this case, to be able to know what's going on with the perpetrator of the crime. I think it's a good and a smart law. It's something we need to have in place. So yeah, I'm absolutely in favor of it. Other questions? Anybody have any questions on any of the other? Yeah.
Who's gonna win the Kansas State Oklahoma game this Saturday?
I have absolutely no idea. I bet it'll be one of the two teams. Yeah, go ahead.
Could you briefly explain each state question and talk about it, briefly?
Yeah, I may forget one or two. But 793, as I recall, is the one for eyeglasses. You know, for in the stores. It's basically, you know, Walmart is to a large degree behind this. Walmart and Target and stores like that, and it would bring where you can have the optician in the Walmart store at the same location that you are selling the eyeglasses and things like that. Personally, I don't know how I have yet decided how I feel about that bill, because I've heard arguments from both sides. I've met with just met with an optometrist a couple days ago, you know, vehemently arguing against it. On the other side, I've also heard where people are saying this is going to save people money. I had a gentleman come up to me about a week ago, was talking to me about it, and said, I go to the eye doctor every year, and it ends up costing me $700 for my eyeglasses. And he's like, and I want to see this where I can go in and hopefully save some money on what I'm having to spend. It's where there's only 3 states, I believe, in the nation that don't allow what this law would allow. On the other hand, there is a problem with it. Matter of fact, I had the gentleman that I was speaking to that's in the profession the other day told me he didn't have a real problem with 793 except for one portion of the state question that exempts Walmart or whoever it is from having to follow the guidelines, the medical guidelines that are laid out as far as certain restrictions. And that, to me, would give me pause. So again, I'm kind of like, I don't know. I mean, we could go in and that portion of it legislatively fix later on, just like Ben was talking about the medical marijuana, things that we need to pass legislation to fix the problems that were in the state question. We could do the same thing with that, to take and remove that exemption, because that seems to be a big issue with a lot of the practitioners. Then we've got, so we got 793, 794, let's see, 800. Yeah. Anybody remind me of which one is, I can't remember what all the different questions are. Does anybody have them?
800 is the one about using the building funds
Yeah.
for education.
Okay. Well, yeah, the one, I'm terrible with the numbers, but whichever one it is that has it for the building funds, this is one where it does not allow a tax increase. You're allowed to take and have ad valorem taxes for the building funds and that at 5 mils currently. So you can pass that currently, and that's the highest you can go. Well, that remains the same. What that proposal does is it says that local school districts can put forth a bond issue in which they state that a portion of the funds that's going to be raised can be used for operating expenses. So let's, if a school system, the school board decides they want to take and build a facility and they want to incorporate some funds for whatever. It could be teacher pay. It could be whatever they want to put it toward. they can, they have to put it in the state, in the bond question, and then it has to be approved by those local voters. It's not a mandate. There's no requirement that any school district ever do it, but it gives them an additional option. I voted to allow the state question to go forth to allow the voters to decide whether they want it or not. Personally, if I had a bond issue come up with that in my school district, I would probably vote against it. That particular, because I'm not comfortable with changing the way that ad valorem taxes can be used. But I did have a number of representatives from schools got a hold of me when we were doing the bill in committee. And they asked me to vote for it, telling me they thought it would be good for their district. With that in mind, I thought, well, I'll go ahead and vote to let it go through committee so it will go to the ballot and let the voters decide whether they wanted to do that or not. Then we've got two more state questions. One is the lieutenant governor and the governor running on the same ticket. As it stands right now, you could end up with a governor and lieutenant governor from different parties who are adamant and completely opposed to each other and undermining each other for the entire 4 years or 8 years or whatever they're in. What this does is it changes it to where you would have the governor and lieutenant governor running on the same ticket, just like you see the president and the vice president running on the same ticket. And the method for that would be laid out by the legislature. You know, the rules for how you would determine who's going to be on the ticket. That's not a part of the state question. The state question says that the legislature will set forth the rules for this. But the idea is basically to allow where folks are going to actually work together, get elected together. And instead of having two positions that you're electing, you end up with just electing the team instead of just the two individuals. And then there's one more state question. Does anybody remember what that one is? And I know I've got brilliant insight on it, if I can remember what it is.
Budget for the Vision Fund?
Oh, yeah. That is State Question 800.
Correct.
That is State Question 800. That is the Oklahoma Vision Fund, which I strongly support. And what this basically is right now, basically every state except Oklahoma and I think one other that have oil and gas revenue have a fund like this set up already. You're looking to the future and you're saying, you know what? We're not going to have oil and gas revenue forever. And it goes up and it goes down. The Oklahoma Vision Fund sets 5% the first year and then an additional 0.2% each year thereafter of oil and gas revenue. It does not increase the tax on anything. It just takes a portion of the existing tax revenue and sets it aside in an investment fund that down the road the state can pull a portion of it. I think 4% is the amount that they're allowed to pull to use when they want to toward general revenue. I think that if this had been done back in the 1990s, this past session, we would have had enough money that we could have drawn just with that 4% to pay a $2,500 pay raise for every teacher in the state just from the Oklahoma Vision Fund. So that type of thing will give us funds that we can use as we go down the road and gradually build up some money so that we have it for not just the rainy day fund that we can tap into, but have funds when the oil and gas start to dry up and so that we won't be completely dependent on oil and gas down the road. And I think it's an excellent question and should be supported.
So who decides, what investment fund that money goes into?
Thank you. Excuse me. I think, I don't have the question in front of me. Matter of fact, I have them in my other car. I didn't bring them with me. And I do not remember off the top of my head where that's over, what the oversight is. I think it might be the treasurer that makes those decisions. But I think it's a good idea to start putting money aside for the future.
If it's invested wisely.
Yes. Well, it's like the teacher retirement fund. For years, the money was being pulled out of that, and as well as the other retirement funds. And years ago, we had gotten that fund about 10, 12 years ago, was down in the 40-some percent funded. And about 11, 12 years ago, the legislature came in and said, we're going to start fixing this. And so we've been putting into that teacher retirement fund an extra $300 million a year to build it back up. Because the money was not being, it is not that it wasn't being invested wisely. In fact, as a teacher, I get a statement, as others do, if you're in the teacher retirement fund, and telling you how the investments are going. And in fact, in recent years, I've been in it for 20 years now, it seems that the investing in that has been pretty good. They've had a fairly decent return. But the problem was, as we started so low, that now we're only up to about 68 or 69% funded, even though we've been putting an extra $300 million a year into that fund. And we need to get it up to about 85% funded. Well, if we had been planning ahead years ago and not been pulling the money out of there and allowing that fund to build up for the retirement fund, we wouldn't be having to put the $300 million a year into it that we're doing now. And that's what I'm saying with State Question 800, is we need to put money aside that we can't just take out and use. We can't pull it all out like we've done with the rainy day fund, that we have to leave it in there to build over a period of time so that we can then have funds to use when the oil and gas revenue dries up. Any other questions? I think that's all the state questions.
Okay. Any other questions for the senator?
By the way, thanks for that.
Oh, there's a question.
Oh,
So last year, I believe it was 788 was passed, which made the illicit drugs a misdemeanor. And that has impacted our local alternative court programs, because now those are misdemeanor charges, and it's legislated that to get into one of those programs, it has to be a felony. Have you thought about changing that to where we can accept misdemeanor charges into alternative court programs?
Well, I appreciate that question. And that was actually passed a couple years ago, before when I got it, right when I was getting into the legislature, and that does cause some serious problems. In fact, I wrote a bill in response to that, because I worked with Kenny Wright to write a bill, because everything became a misdemeanor at that point in time. And I've talked with about finding ways to get people into drug court and get people into rehab without being a felony, and that's gone nowhere. And part of that is federal funding, and the difficulty that we have with getting the federal funding, as what I've been told. So one of the things that I did, I had Senate Bill 256 that I ran for 2 years, and it died for 2 years. And that was the bill that I wrote with District Attorney Wright, in which if you have someone that continues being arrested for this, that it escalates to where you can have a felony charge, so that somebody can be forced into rehab, forced into drug court. And my argument for that to the governor and staff and to leadership is that over time, if you have someone who's an addict and who's getting in trouble with this over and over again, the addiction does not decrease over time, but it increases over time. And if you have someone who's around kids, as the addiction increases, the danger to the kids increases rather than decreases. And I was concerned about, one, getting help, making sure the kids are protected. Two, I think we incarcerate too many people in Oklahoma, too many women, too many men. We should not be number one in the nation in that. A lot of that is because of drugs. We need to find ways to get people into rehab. We need to find ways to get people into drug court. But also we need to have the teeth in the law so that law enforcement can go after the people that are the distributors. So that they can go after, and right now with everything misdemeanor, as I've had a number of district attorneys tell me, and sheriffs and chiefs of police, that when you have somebody that is just a misdemeanor, they're not even going to do anything about it. And if you have the ability to take and follow up with a felony, now you can get that person to flip on the person that's the dealer. And without it, you can't. And so what I try to do is craft a bill, and the governor shot me down for 2 years in a row, where she had folks come and let me know that she was going to battle me on that particular bill. So we did not agree on that. But I want to find a way that we can do that. But at the same time, I want to find ways that we can take and get the people who are nonviolent criminals, who don't need to be in prison. I want to get them out and back into the workforce. And I've had bills to that effect as well, where I had one bill which I didn't get through. I tried for 2 years, and that is one where, let's say that you have a professional license, you're convicted of a felony, guess what? You just lost that license. Well, let's say that you're a architect or you're an engineer, and you just lost your license because of a felony conviction that had nothing to do with your job. My bill was to take and have a way for that person to get their professional license back so that they can go back to work in that profession and make that good income that they were making before and be a productive member of society. That died 2 years in a row as well. I had another one where I've had individuals who told me that they've had trouble because of felony convictions and the fines and the fees and everything that's tied with it, being able to get a driver's license. And I had a bill to suspend the fines and fees when they come out of prison so that they can take and get their a probationary driver's license for a year and then begin paying those fines and fees. But it allows them to be able to drive to work and get a job and have an income coming in where they can take and actually pay the things that are necessary. And in fact, some of the fines and fees are ridiculous that we have on that. So we talk about how we don't put people in jail for debt, but in reality we do with a lot of the fines and fees that we have. So, those are all things that, I think are destructive to us as a society and that I'm trying to work on, like you're talking about, in regards to that. I'm just, as far as your initial question about the misdemeanor drug court, I just haven't seen any movement on that. But,
Do you think you'll have any movement with the new governor?
I think so. I think that, I'm hoping that, the new governor is going to be Kevin Stitt. And I know Kevin pretty well. I've met with him a number of times. I've spent, in fact, one day I spent half a day with him, talking with him. And this is a guy that's a common sense guy who wants to do what's best for the state. He wants to take and see us get folks out of the prison system. He wants to see us bring business to the state. He's got a lot of really good ideas, and I'm very, very pleased. And I've talked with him about some of my ideas, and I do think that I would see a big difference in his approach than I did with Governor Fallon's on something. And I'm not going to say that Governor Fallon was bad about everything. She signed 4 of my bills the first year and 8 of my bills the second year, so I'm tickled pink about that. But certain areas I wish that she had not been as difficult to work with. And I think she could have been a much better leader, particularly in the last 4 years.
Going back to your point on how it's so expensive for people when they get out of prison, with all the fines and things like that, do you foresee legislation in the future somewhat, kind of like a college graduate gets a 6-month deferment before they have to start paying their student loans back?
Now, there are deferrals that a judge can allow right now, but again, it's up to the discretion of the judge. And that was one of my issues with the legislation I was trying to pass, is that oftentimes the judges don't give the deferrals. And I was trying to get automatic deferrals like what you're talking about. I can tell you one place that I got the most pushback from that was over at the Supreme Court, and that was from Jerry Askins, who works over there in the Supreme Court. She, even though I tried to work with her on those bills, she basically pushed back on everything, because a lot of the funding for the courts and that comes from these fines and fees, and they don't want to give up anything, and they don't want to find alternative methods for doing it. And I want to find where we legislatively, change it where we're not so dependent on these fines and fees. When I think, and I think that the logic is just not there, in that you say, well, we're not going to defer the fines and fees, so this person's not going to be able to get their license, or is not going to be able to go back into their profession, or not be able to get a job, so he or she is not going to be able to pay the fines and fees. To me, it makes more sense to give the deferral so that they can get that job and start paying those things, so that you have the revenue coming in instead of not getting it at all, or putting them back in prison because they didn't pay. And to me, my argument is we need to take and have something like the deferral, because it makes a lot more sense to keep people out of prison, not paying $20,000 a year to keep them in there when they don't need to be in there.
Mr. Bergstrom, could you share with us some of the bills that you got passed at your comment?
Okay, I had, first year, I had I'm trying to, interlocal cooperative bill for schools, which was, basically it allows for being able to get work done, instead of having to go this whole big bidding process and all kind of stuff, that you could get minor construction projects, and you could buy different things that you're kind of restricted on being able to get now, at much less cost. And it was modeled on the one that they have down in Texas. And I had a school board member that came to me and brought that idea to me. We worked on it and got that passed. I've been told that that's been helpful. I had, that same year, the Reading Sufficiency Act bill for being able to have teachers and parents do the evaluations of the third graders, who fail the reading test, to determine if they should be probationary, passed on to the next year. In that bill, I extended that because it was about to expire, and then I also included in that bill some tracking information so we could see how well the kids are doing as they go down the road. The ones that are being passed with a probationary passage versus the ones that were held back, and that type of thing. So we can see how the kids 10 years down the road, how they're doing in school. So that type of thing. I did I had a couple of Second Amendment bills that I did. One was a felony pointing bill. In Oklahoma, when I first got into office, the law was and I'll give you an example of what the problem was. There was a gentleman in Dell City that I heard about, 100% disabled veteran. He's sitting on his porch. I think it was his wife, maybe it was his daughter, I can't remember right now. Somebody told me it was his daughter, I thought it was his wife. Was out in the yard, and 3 punks, gang members, whatever you want to call them, came up and started pushing her around. He pulls out his gun, tells them to leave her alone. The guys back off and leave. They then go down the road and tell a cop that he pulled a gun on. The cops show up, police show up, and they talk to him about what happened, and they said, you know, you're perfectly within your rights to protect, found out all that was going on. He said, you're perfectly within your rights. We're not going to do anything about this. Then the district attorney decided to charge this gentleman with 2 counts of felony pointing. Here's the way it worked. If he had shot them, he'd have been within his rights in Oklahoma law. But because he put his gun away and let them live, he could be charged with felonies. So I ran a law that year, the felony pointing law, which the governor signed, that said no. And I had a senator from Tulsa that debated me on the floor about this, wanted to tell me about how, he knew somebody who had been shot in Tulsa and all that. And I'm like, Senator, here's the reality. If you come up and are threatening me or my wife or my family member, and I pull my gun and I shoot you, I'm within my rights. But if I pull my gun and you back down and I let you walk away, I just saved your life. Why is it a bad thing for me to save your life? And so it took that gentleman in Del City, took him 8 months and multiple appearances in court to finally have those charges dropped. And his life made a living hell because he was protecting his family. And it made absolutely no sense to me. So I ran that bill. This past session I ran one that might be applicable to this church, this building that we're in, the congregation here. Under Oklahoma law, if you defend yourself or someone defends themselves within a business or home or car, you're protected from lawsuit. If you take it and somebody threatens you and you pull a gun and shoot them, you're protected. As long as it was done in self-defense, you're okay. You don't have those protections, didn't have those protections in a place of worship. So I ran a bill this last session that said, no, we're going to extend this to places of worship as well. So that if you take and are in your church and we have a situation like you saw in Texas last year, where somebody comes in and starts shooting people or threatening people, and one of the members of the congregation pulls their gun and shoots this guy or gal or whatever, that the church cannot be sued out of existence for allowing that to happen. So you still, as an individual, you always have the right to defend yourself, but the church was open to liability, possibility of a lawsuit. So I ran a bill to get rid of that. So just like a business or a homeowner would not have that kind of liability. So those are some of the bills that I ran. Anything else? Yeah.
All of us here work within these small communities, when we talk about economics and, trying to get our towns to grow and be able to help all of our resources in our communities, what do you foresee as far as economic growth for our smaller communities? And how can we get that?
I think that, excuse me. Economic development for the state is a good thing, but it's, I'll give you a couple ideas. One, Mid-America Industrial Park, you're familiar with that down in Pryor. Well, down in Mays County, they were funding STEM labs in a number of the schools down there, like in Pryor and Adair 8 areas where I live. And so I went to Dave Stewart at Mid-America Industrial Park, and I said, hey, I got a lot of school districts in my district that could really use some help with STEM education. And we're trying to get business to come relocate here, to come to the industrial park in Miami, to come to Grove, to come to Fairland, to come to Veneta, come to Ketchum Airport, looking at developing, trying to get some industry to come in there, light industry to come in there as well, which would impact this area. And STEM education is important to that, and getting our local kids where they're interested in things like engineering and doing all these types of things. I got a commitment from them of $250,000 to do STEM labs in local schools, and so they're working with Ketchum. They're working with, and these are schools not in Mays County. These are like Blue Jacket and Welch and Ketchum and some others that, and I'm trying to get them to, for us to find a way to have recurring assistance to keep the STEM labs up and going, and then expand it and get more and more of it into all the schools. So that's one. I also see, as we take it, education obviously is an important part, and trying to make sure that we have the funding that's necessary for education, but also that we are getting our career techs and our colleges working with industry. I was at the Age of Agility Summit in Oklahoma City about a month ago, and the whole summit dealt with the issue of where the jobs are going to be over the next, in the future, coming up over the next 10, 20, 30 years, how to get our young people prepared for them. And so the majority, only 20 to 25% of our future jobs are going to require a college degree. Most of the jobs, 65% of them are going to require between a 6-month and a 2-year certification. We need to be moving that direction quickly. We need to be getting our career techs and our colleges moving to getting the kids where they may not be going and getting a degree that they're not going to use, and spending all that money on a degree that they're not going to end up using, when they can go get a good job with just a certification. And we need to be working with industry, and that's something that, I've met with business leaders, with the different members of the chambers, Department of Commerce, the Miami Regional, Steve Gilbert and up there and others. I regularly talk with folks about what is it that we can do. I hear about how we're trying to recruit business into our different industrial parks and into the region. And we just want to keep doing that, but also the number one driver for jobs in the future, it's small business. It's the individual entrepreneurs. And we have to make sure that we don't put up any kind of regulations or tax burdens that are going to make it harder for them to be able to survive and be successful. So, that's just some of the ways that I see. And since that's my primary focus, that's something I talk to people about constantly and go to meetings about and work on task force about all the time. Any other questions?